It's one of those issues people feel passionately about. Should Obeah be criminalized in Jamaica or not? Well, the courts have a decision to make as to whether the Obeah Act is unconstitutional or not. But in the meantime, church members are marching in the streets. They say keep it on the books, keep the law on the books. Cultural and historical experts, on the other hand, are saying, look, get over it. Why does this law, the Obeah Act, and the practice of Obeah stir up such strong emotions? Thank you so much for joining us. This is All Angles. I'm Dion Jackson Miller. In studio with us to talk about this, we do have Professor of Cultural Studies and Director of the Center for Reparation Research at the University of the West Indies Mona campus, Dr. Sonia Stanley Nair. On Zoom, going to be having Bert Samuels. He's the attorney in this matter, representing Professor Clinton Hutton, who filed a constitutional challenge to the Obeah Act. And we are also going to have on Zoom the chair of the Jamaica Umbrella Groups of Churches, the Reverend Dr. Michael Smith. Before all of that, though, I sat down with the professor of history at the University of Edinburgh, Diana Payton. She's done a lot of research on the origins of the Obeah Act and Obeah prosecutions in Jamaica. In relation to the Obeah Act, let me start first with the concerns, because whenever you start to have the conversation, as in this case about the recent constitutional challenge or calls for repeal, you get an upsurge of very deep and, sincere concerns from Jamaicans who say, but Obeah is evil. One person said on a video that I did about it, if it's one thing we should keep from slavery, it's the Obeah Act, because of the concern about regulating what is seen as something that's evil and anti-Christian. So in the context of those concerns, how do you respond?
So I do understand that concern, but I think there are other ways of dealing with evil or bad behavior or in the legal framework that would be left behind, even if the Obeah law wasn't there. If somebody is using or seem to be using Obeah to hurt somebody else through violence or something like that, there's laws that control those things. But the Obeah law is very, very widely drawn, and its history is one of being used against poor people and people who are identified as particularly African. The definition in law defines Obeah and Mayoism as the same thing. And Mayo is a term that generally has a much broader popular meaning and understanding to really mean Afro-Jamaican religions of various kinds. So by doing that, it potentially defines almost any kind of religious practice that is understood to be associated with Africa, or to be oriented towards African religion as Obeah. Secondly, it has a clause that says that if you are found with what is legally defined as instruments of Obeah, it's up to you to prove that you're not an Obeah practitioner. And an instrument of Obeah is defined quite circularly in the law as essentially anything that can be used to make Obeah with. But in practice, when I did research looking at lots and lots of court cases from the 19th century through to the late 20th century. And in practice, the instruments of Obeah that appear in court are things like rum, playing cards, rice, candles, things that pretty much anybody might have in their home. And so that kind of breadth of definition is also, I think, a big problem. And it means that it can be used or potentially could be used very arbitrary ways. It gives a lot of power to enforcers who might choose to use it essentially against people who they have some hostility to.
Following on that, you said in one article you wrote, the primary function of Jamaica's Obeah Act has been to reinforce class and race hierarchies. Can you tell us what you meant?
The people who have been subject to prosecution under the Obeah Act have been overwhelmingly poor people, poor Jamaicans. And I don't think that's a coincidence, because if you look at the debates that took place when the Obeah law was passed, which is in the 1890s, and so it's an old piece of legislation that's been only very lightly updated. If you look at what was going on in the 1890s when it was passed, what you see is a lot of debate essentially among middle-class Jamaicans and the colonial authorities, who are identifying Jamaican popular culture and religious culture as a problem, as something that is uncivilized, as something that is some sources describe it as a sort of stain on the island of Jamaica. And so the goal at that time was to promote Jamaica as a kind of modern place, to attract tourists, and to attract investment. And the people making that law wanted to essentially get rid of Jamaica's mass culture, Jamaica's culture associated with the poorer parts of the population, and in particular, Jamaica's culture that is associated with an African heritage. And so, race and class go together in Jamaica, orientation to Africa and being from a working class or poor background often go together, and certainly go together in the minds of the people who are making the law.
And then when you put it in the context that, as you said, it's a very old law, 1890s, that's still on the books, hasn't been modernized or amended since that period of time. What does that say to us in 2025?
Well, it has been amended a little bit. So it was amended in 2013, and it was amended because up to that time, the punishments for Obeah included physical violence, included flogging. And I found it very interesting that when around 2013, the Jamaican government amended the law to remove that. They didn't take the opportunity to repeal it entirely, which they could have done, because other Caribbean nations have. There's no law against Obeah in Trinidad and Tobago. There's no law against Obeah in Barbados. Those and a number of other places have taken the opportunity to repeal that law. And I don't think that we would say that those are places with a great proliferation of evil beyond what we see in Jamaica. So I think it'd be worth people who are concerned about the possible change to the law here to look at what's happened in those other places where there is no Obeah law anymore. So we're talking about a law from the late 19th century, still operational today in 2025 in Jamaica. Obviously, a huge amount has changed since then. In 1898, when the Obeah law was passed, Jamaica was a colony of Britain. There was no universal suffrage. No, there was very little political control at all by Jamaicans of their legal system, their legal framework. And so it seems quite anachronistic to me that Jamaica would sustain that particular aspect of its law. The current version of the law was largely framed in 1898, but Obeah had been illegal going back to 1760. That's when the first law was made against Obeah. And that law was made in the context of a response to Tacky's rebellion or Tacky's war that probably a lot of your viewers will know about, one of the biggest uprisings of enslaved people against their enslavement in Jamaica. And Tacky was advised by what was identified in the colonial sources as an Obeah man. And that's why the Jamaica Assembly at that time made a law against Obeah, because they could see the political value of Obeah to enslaved people in Jamaica. So that, I think, is something else that should give Jamaicans pause about keeping something like this on their legal books. That this is really a law with a very direct heritage of anti-insurgency.
Could you just elaborate on that point a little more? The value you said to enslaved peoples and this anti-insurgency nature.
During the period of slavery, Obeah, as it now, had a very wide range of meanings. But one meaning that it had was for spiritual practices that essentially would provide protection. So that's what you see in Tacky's uprising, is that we don't know exactly the details of the ceremonies or the rituals because we don't have records of them. But what seems to have happened was that Taki had an advisor who was a spiritual leader, or maybe more than one, and that they performed rituals that gave the people who were involved in that military campaign the confidence and a sense of solidarity and protection that enabled them to fight. And they did fight, very bravely and for a long period. And that's what the colonial authorities really feared, is that enslaved people would have essentially African knowledge that would enable them to work together to combat the system of slavery. And that's where the law comes from.
You spoke of the repealing some of the other Caribbean territories, and that we haven't seen any problems there. I have to tell you though, whenever you mention repeal of the Obeah Act, what Jamaican says, but look at Haiti, and what they equate as a practice of voodoo in Haiti with the misfortunes over the years in that particular country. Can you respond to that?
Wow, well, that's a lot to unpack there. The first thing I would say is that, like in Jamaica, the solidarity of enslaved people in fighting against enslavement partly came from spiritual work, from voodoo. If you look at the history of the Haitian Revolution, which I think most Jamaicans would see positively, even if they see the current situation of Haiti negatively, there was a lot of African-oriented ritual and ceremony and knowledge involved in creating the solidarity that enabled the fighters in the Haitian Revolution to fight. So I think there's a positive history of voodoo there that we should acknowledge. The other thing I would say is that the history of Haiti and the troubles that Haiti has, I just wouldn't attribute to voodoo at all. I would say there's a whole heap of other things that have happened in Haiti's history that have led to the situation of Haiti today, not least the fact that after the revolution, the country was internationally isolated for a generation. And then in order to get back into the international system, the government of Haiti had to pay France a huge amount of money in reparation, which is an interesting way to think about it, but there's essentially the counter reparation where Haitians had to pay France for having won their own freedom. And in doing so, the country took on a huge amount of debt, and that damaged the possibility of development over the whole 19th century. And then Haiti was subject to a very long occupation by the United States, which was also very damaging. Then later, a dictatorship that was also supported by the United States, and again limited Haiti's ability to develop. So I don't see any of those things as being really connected to voodoo or Obeah, even though voodoo is an important part of Haitian culture and Haitian history. But voodoo is essentially the religion, one of the religions of the Haitian people, and it's not all about negative power or hostility. It's a community-oriented religious practice, and with a lot of richness and a lot of cultural importance.
I know during your research you didn't find many instances of the law having been used, certainly in recent times. So were you surprised to hear there was an arrest and a conviction?
I was really surprised when I heard that, because I did research in using the newspapers, because Obeah cases were not recorded really anywhere official, because they were heard at the low-level courts, the magistrates' courts. And I looked at the Jamaican newspapers going through from the late 19th century all the way through to 1980. And I found lots and lots of Obeah cases in the early period of the 20th century, going up to the 1950s. There's a lot of cases every decade. Then in the 1960s and 70s, what I found was a really radically and rapid drop-off in prosecutions. So I found one prosecution that succeeded in conviction in the early 1960s, and I found an arrest reported in the mid-1970s, which didn't appear to go to trial. And then subsequent to that, then I didn't find any more cases. I stopped looking in 1980. I didn't look from 1980 to 2015, which was when the book came out. But I don't think there were lots of Obeah arrests and convictions in that period. What it seemed to me must have happened was that around the time of independence, the police just decided that this wasn't something that they wanted to pursue anymore. And in fact, in the previous round of debates about whether or not this law should be repealed, some people argued there's no need to repeal the Obeah law because actually this Obeah law never used.
Okay, so that argument is out the window now.
Well, it seems that way, right? That in fact, that's the risk of keeping a law on the books, even if you think you're not going to use it.
Okay, and we're going to take a break and then come back with our guests. Remember, want to hear from you as well. Our WhatsApp line, 876-254-0693. Give us your first name, give us your general location. Soon come.